say, we'll start off now. So my name is Amy Chan, and I'm running today this particular session on AI and health. As we know, the session is being recorded. So if anyone has issues with recording, please do let us know. Otherwise, I believe this will also be on the YouTube for the World Universities Network. So I would like to welcome everybody. So just making sure if everyone has any issues, questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat. We'll have a discussion at the end. But I will be discussing around AI and health. So if you do have any issues or questions, please feel free to raise your hands during this webinar. Otherwise, this webinar will be for about an hour. We'll be discussing for the first 45, 50 minutes or so, but welcome, obviously, any of your suggestions and your comments towards the end. Great. So welcome to everybody. My name is Associate Professor Amy Chan. I'm at the School of Pharmacy at the University of Auckland. Today, we will be discussing around the application of AI and health. So as a bit of an outline of today, so we will be doing what is the overview of AI, what do we have in terms of its applications, where has it been used, but because this series of webinars really focuses on ethical and responsible use, we'll be discussing around some of the ethical considerations if you're thinking about using data and AI in your projects, around who is responsible for this use. For example, around data ownership, governance, privacy, the idea of, what do you do with the data? Are we simply using it to monitor and predict outcomes, or are we actually trying to intervene and change the course of someone's illness? And last but not least, towards the second half of this webinar, I'll be discussing some things, case examples of what happens when things don't go according to plan. The example around biases in data and accurate algorithms, around data sharing and where data has not been used with consent of participants. At this point, I think I would really welcome some of the discussion towards the end around your case examples and thoughts. All right, so before we start, I'll take you on a little brief journey through AI. I think a lot of you will be familiar with artificial intelligence and big data, but really around the historical journey of artificial intelligence, it's been around for longer than we think. I think most of the people around us think AI has been something that's existed only in the last 10, 20 years. But if we look at the journey and development of AI, the Turing test, as a lot of people know, is the test for machine intelligence, as in what is human and not human. That was around the 1950s. But we actually had a chatbot already created around the 1960s. It was the first chatbot that was created in a very simplified form, but allowed some human-computer interaction and some interpretation of responses. And then there was discussion on the very first kind of chess game that was against artificial intelligence. That was in 1997, Man versus Machine, where Deep Blue Machine beat the chess legend at the time. And then there was discussions around, can we equip robots as well with more emotions? That was in 1998, where then people started thinking about, the emotionally equipped robot and responding with empathy to human emotions. So this is really around the 1990s. Well, we've since seen an explosion in literature and research around AI, and which is why it's been a forefront of people's mind in the last 10, 20 years. Nearly things like features like voice recognition, obviously things like Siri that's built into phones, into Apple phones, also into Android phones, having that interaction, the Q&A with computer systems, and then obviously the takeoff of large language models and generative AI, things like ChatGPT, having a revolutionary tool for automated conversations. I think understanding that it is a revolution that we're seeing, and that AI is anything that's related to making machines smarter. But within AI, you may have heard of terms such as machine learning or deep learning and NLP. These are all subsets of AI, with machine learning involving systems that can learn by themselves, deep learning that's built more with patterns, or deep neural networks detect different patterns with minimal human involvement. And then there's on the other end, NLP, which is much more around focusing on language. So for example, free text data, and all of these have applications towards health, but just an understanding of this journey and the relationship is the context for today's webinar. So where does AI take us through the health journey? So this will refer to quite a lot. It is in both the prevention stage, even before people become unwell. Health doesn't start just when people become unwell. Health actually starts as soon as people, before people get unwell, is around keeping people well, and health, in a state of health, and preventing disease is also part of the health journey. So AI has implications through the health journey, from prevention to when you start suspecting something is wrong, so through the screening stage to the diagnostic stage, and then treatments and perhaps aftercare in terms of after treatments, or perhaps palliative care, depending on the health journey. So around this, the AI applications and applications to health, we have seen an increase, and there's a lot of interest because we think there's a potential annual value of billions of dollars of cost savings through the use of AI. And annually, there have been figures that have been reported. It could be around $150 billion in annual savings by 2026 for US healthcare if all these applications are implemented. And we'll see it's not just around, with AI, people think of robots. So indeed, robot-assisted surgery and virtual nursing assistants are our top in terms of cost savings. But in terms of applications of health, it's really around freeing up clinician time to focus on the things that are most important for clinical care, and removing some of those back-end processes or making it more efficient. So administrative workflow, helping with dosing, helping with clinical trial participation, helping automate some of the early diagnoses. Those are all other areas where you could have AI applied to healthcare. At the moment, we can say that AI is applied to healthcare is not so much around clinical decision-making or around improving outcomes per se, but it is around trying to improve that workflow and minimizing some of those administrative tasks. But when you talk about AI, as we said, it's a starting point. It could start in the patient journey where they start, Googling, looking on their mobile devices, searching online. That's where it could alert patients about their conditions. And also we know that these smartwatches, there's a year-on-year increase of around 19% of people owning smartwatches and smart wearables around the world. And again, those diagnostics through changes in people's heart rates and their breathing, their sleep, their stress scores, all that feedback could act as a starting point, as we said, for a patient's journey. So that's where AI first starts. And then when it comes to diagnosis, it's around helping support faster diagnosis and more accurate diagnosis before the start of treatment. And then when treatment starts, it's reducing those errors and improving the efficiency of the healthcare unit. And once treatment is started, we then want to enable remote patient monitoring and post-treatment care to be able to accurately understand what is happening to the patient. Are they responding? Do we need to tailor doses? Do we need to stop the doses? Do we need to switch treatment? And how long do we start or switch treatment? Are they well enough? Are they responding? Are there side effects? So it's really all across the spectrum that we see the implications of AI. So I'm going to take you through each of these steps around some of the examples where AI can be applied to health. I'm going to talk about Imogen as a case example where you can understand, and I want you to meet Imogen here, and to understand her health journey and how AI may possibly change her journey through health. So we'll start with Imogen in terms of wellness. So Imogen is pretty well. She likes using digital technology, and she has her computers, she has some smartwatches, and this is where AI initially with wearable data or tracking really allows people to stay well. So we've seen an increase in interest in wellness tracking apps and health tracking apps on Google and Android and the Play stores and Apple app stores alone. There are so many health apps that are on there that allow people to track things such as their menstrual cycle, their sleep patterns, their stress levels, physical activity data, There are alerts, for example, to try and motivate people to undertake more healthy behaviors, such as doing more exercise, sleeping better, mindfulness apps to reduce stress and meditation. But also there's a lot of AI in that in terms of feedback. So we know, for example, the Apple Health app gives alerts when there are changes in your walking distance, or it analyzes changes in trends over time and gives you alerts to say, oh, maybe you should be moving now, or you should be doing more exercise. So there's lots of apps out there and AI tools to help support some of that symptom monitoring. At the same time as well, there's also other applications in the prevention stage. So even before people become sick, is around drug discovery. So finding target treatments for drug discovery and development. So we've seen this with AI being able to look at genomic data and other clinical parameters, looking at drug efficacy and adverse effects to identify novel therapeutic targets, or to see if there are new indications for existing drugs and new applications. And then we see with Imogen, with the screening. So Imogen at this moment, we said, is pretty well, but she might get to a screening stage where she might find a bit of a breast lump for herself. So she's starting to think, should she actually seek a medical care? And so where does AI come in? Well, we know traditionally, you said it has taken a long time with the screening process to be able to identify people's diagnostics and understand what the health problem is. But with screening, we can actually train these algorithms using AI to identify clinical markers in real time to facilitate the early detection of potential outbreaks, for example, also to look at actually predicting the probability of people having different disease states. So what this figure also shows is that there are particular genetic variants that may exist in people. So in Imogen's case, there may be a genetic variant which may predispose her to having breast cancer or protect her from having certain types of cancer. And with AI, it could be applied with genomic data to actually identify what these variants might be and successfully actually predict what the outcome. So what we can see is you might be able to look at people's genomics data, look at what the mutation is, and work out the probability, depending on the mutation, of what disease state they might get. So in the figure there, you can see, you could look at the probability of getting things like depression or hypertension or breast cancer or Alzheimer's disease. So again, looking at different clusters and their probability. And in the field of oncology and cancer, it's being able to categorize cancers into different molecular subtypes, which we weren't able to do before without AI. And also being able to predict different profiles. And that's certainly, there's a study that was done looking at autism spectrum disorder, which could identify certain genetic variants being associated with autism spectrum disorder by solely screening and using AI to look at all this genomic data. And as well as AI genomics and prediction of people's outcome of different health conditions. There's also surveillance, so you could apply to population surveillance, for example, with COVID-19 and different outbreaks. People may also be able to look at people's patterns or look at genomic and gene variants to be able to undertake surveillance to see, can they predict the next major outbreak based on changes in genomic sequences? Or is there some way also to use the same data to allow targeting or personalized medicine before people even start treatment to understand whether they will respond to a particular treatment or not, which is at the screening stage. And then there is a diagnosis stage. So we can see Imogen there in the picture. So she goes seek her doctor. She's undergone some screening. So what happens in diagnosis? So especially in the field of cancer, there's been a lot of work that's been done with radiographic images. We know that traditionally in the past, people had to look at radiographic images manually to flag different anomalies. But with AI, the speed of being able to look at these images and flag particular ones that need to be reviewed allows more time for radiographers to focus on reviews that require more interpretation or judgment, whereas AI can quickly identify the ones as well that may be more straightforward. So it really, really helps. And we've seen this particularly in the cancer space. So there was a study about 10 years ago now, so quite an old study, where there were researchers in New York that found that using AI on an automatic analysis could match specific lung nodules on these chest CT images. And they were able to do it around 62% to 97% faster than a panel of radiologists. So AI generated efficiencies could potentially save over $3 billion every year by being able to do this much faster than a human eye can in terms of identifying and matching lung nodules. And similarly, in terms of breast cancer, so with the case example here of Imogen, as I'm talking about, there was a study as well in the UK where people input a large data set of mammograms into an AI system for breast cancer diagnosis. And what the study found was that using AI to interpret mammograms not only improved efficiency, but there was also an absolute reduction as well in false positives and false negatives. So false positives is where people have inaccurately diagnosed someone as having cancer when they do not, and that was reduced by around 6%. And false negative is missing the diagnosis, that was reduced by around 9%. And similar, there's also more sensitive to diagnosing masses. A similar study found that compared to radiologists, an AI supported diagnostic tool meant the ability to diagnose a mass and identifies breast cancer was around 90% compared to 78% from radiologists alone. And in better, AI was actually also better at detecting early breast cancer, around 91% accuracy compared to radiologists at 74% accuracy. So again, with AI, we're able to see these patterns in data, these changes that may be difficult to pick up in the naked eye, which makes it a lot faster in terms of diagnosis. And this is also not just for radiographic images. We've also seen this with skin cancer as well, using AI, that we were accurately being able to look at different spots, melanoma spots on the skin, and compared to dermatologists, they were able to detect it a lot quicker in identifying abnormalities in the skin. And there's some other applications. We see this also with things like pneumonia diagnoses, appendicitis diagnoses, diabetic retinopathy. So many different conditions we can see a faster and more accurate diagnoses. And last but not least, also want to mention about clinical laboratory testing. With clinical lab testing, for example, identifying microbiology, there's also improved speed and efficiency and accuracy using AI to accompany and identify pathogens in microbiology in clinical laboratory testing. And then last, the treatment point is probably where we see most of applications of AI. So we said last but not least, the treatment options. So the most obvious, as I said, is there's a lot of discussion around AI-assisted robotic surgery, and that is certainly a very important application in terms of using robots to help. It's not only around AI-assisted robots in real time, which can help physically guide a patient, surgeon's instruments. So in the case of Imogen, where Imogen is going for surgery, for example, for her breast cancer, if AI was around, she could have AI-assisted robotic surgery to help more minute procedures, to help guide instruments in real time. But not only that, the reason why AI-assisted robotic surgery is also helpful is that the robotics can also analyze data from her pre-op medical records, which will help guide and identify the cancer to excise, but also it could use data from actual surgical experiences and actually develop new surgical techniques. And there was a study that was done in not in cancer, but in orthopedic surgery, where there were patients from different surgical sites, and they found that using an AI-assisted robotic technique, there was a 5-fold reduction in surgical complications compared to operating alone by surgeons. And when applied to orthopedic surgery, it could also reduce potentially a 21% reduction in a patient's length of stay following surgery, fewer complications and errors, equating, as we said, to that $40 billion in savings. So there's a lot in there around robotic surgery and helping reduce errors and improve care. Besides robots, though, there's also treatments and medications. So personalized treatment and precision medicine, which has been a topic of interest for the last decade, can finally become a reality with AI. With AI, it's able to look at the different treatment options and actually look at the patient's data and make recommendations that is tailored to the person's particular phenotype and genotype. So understanding their particular health situation, but also tailoring these doses, for example, using their genomic data. There's also help in personalizing and reducing dosage errors. So again, there was a study similar which used AI to generate a mathematical formula to dose immunosuppressant drugs for people post-organ transplant. Normally, to look at dosing, we use guidelines and clinical expertise to support that dosing, especially for medications that have a very narrow therapeutic index. But for AI-assisted dosing, it was able to actually estimate a much more accurate dose and tailor a dose much more accurately and potentially reduce dosing errors by up to 40% preventable medical errors. So again, being able to use AI dosing to reduce dosage errors is another application. As I said, there's also AI nurses as well to be able to look at how can they support recovery and also help with administrative tasks. And we see this a little bit in COVID. So this is an interesting figure here. We've got a robot here helping with care. So when it comes to infectious diseases and COVID or any other pandemic outbreak, there was a lot of applications overseas of using these AI robots, AI virtual assistants to really help with care of patients or administer simple tasks, administer medications, undertake, simple observations and monitoring of the patient without humans having to go into the room because of risk of infection. So we can see, again, there is a lot of opportunities for the use of AI in remote patient care. So I think we come here, we see there's definitely examples. Besides care, there's also overall removing time for administrative work. And we know in general, physicians spend about anything ranging from 30 to 50% of the time actually writing charts and filling in notes and ordering tests, but a lot of that could be way more efficient through use of AI, and same with nursing time as well. So there is administrative tasks that we expect to be reduced over time as AI is implemented. But as with all opportunities, as Winston Churchill once said, comes great responsibility. And whilst we know AI can definitely be a life-changing tool, there's also this issue around ethical and responsible use and consideration. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the use of health data and AI, I really urge you to look at the guidance from WHO. So the World Health Organization does have a guidance, has released a guidance around 2021, I believe, which looked at ethics and governance for the use of artificial intelligence in health. So we know one of the key recommendations from WHO is that AI holds great promise for improving the delivery of healthcare and medicine worldwide, but only if ethics and human rights are put at the heart of its design, its deployment, its use. So it is so important that even though there's so much that you could do with AI, if we don't want harm to come out of it, we really want to make sure that what is being done is ethical and that human rights are put at the center of its design. So from the very beginning, when we conceptualize the use of AI, how it's actually implemented and deployed and used in routine healthcare, it needs to be governed by all these different principles. And so if you haven't had time to read the documents, I can summarize the 6 principles for ethical AI. So when it comes to ethical and responsible use, one of the things that's really discussed is around can we do it in a way that will protect human autonomy? We still want to respect patient choices and understanding human decision making. And so one of the key principles is that when we do develop these algorithms, it's very important that we ensure that the human is a part of and input into design of these AI algorithms. For example, selecting the factors that go into this, or we have large data sets and we apply AI algorithms, we really want to make sure that there is a human element and input into developing these to still allow, humans to override some of the choices or see if the recommendations make sense from a safety point of view, health and clinical point of view, and also making sure there are no biases in the data, which I'll also cover a little bit later. At the end of the principles is around human well-being and safety and public interest. So as you said, at the heart of AI, we have to make sure that whatever is developed, it is around public interest and is promoting and not being a barrier to human well-being and safety. And to achieve this comes to the third principle is around ensuring transparency. So one of the criticisms around AI models is that you can feed large amount of data to AI algorithms, and what is generated, it comes out and they say these are the particular algorithms, or this is the risk score for a particular patient, but it's quite black box, meaning that a lot of people can't see what's inside. They can't find the factors that are actually driving that particular decision making or that particular risk score. And so one of the things, the principles is that whatever is developed, we should be able to understand what is driving that particular risk score. We should ensure transparency and also understand explainability. So there are a lot of researchers around the world, with yourselves included, thinking about with AI, if we are building an AI model, we have to understand and be able to explain it. And explainability is difficult to achieve with AI models, but is where we should be heading in terms of being able to integrate it responsibly into healthcare system. We must understand what factors there are that are driving that recommendation or risk score. And all that is around fostering that responsibility and accountability and ensuring that the models that we develop are inclusive and equitable and doesn't cause any inequities or biases or cause segmented populations or outcomes through the use of AI. And then at the end of the day, we want to make sure that what we recommend is sustainable. So we want to promote AI in a use that is both responsive to changes in the landscape, the healthcare landscape, but also actively sustainable. The other document around guiding principles, which I do recommend you to read, the link is there as well, is the OECD AI principles. These aren't specific to health in particular. So if you are working in AI space, it's a really useful document to just understand what the overall, the global OECD recommendations and guidelines are for AI. But these values-based principles also apply to health. But this includes around inclusive growth. And so things that the WHO principles were modeled on is around making sure that whatever AI is developed, it is inclusive, and we want to make sure it is sustainable. And so policymakers are recommended to invest in AI research and development to help some of that growth and ensure sustainable development. As we said, it needs to be centered on our human values and it needs to be fair. So fostering the digital ecosystem for AI is an important part of those recommendations. I've really touched a little bit on transparency, explainability, but to actually implement that, we need to have a policy, an environment for AI that allows transparency and explainability. So it may be that before AI is implemented, particularly in the healthcare system, there is a policy that ensures that we are moving towards transparency and explainability in these models. And then last but not least, it comes down to robustness, security, and safety. Because we are trying to build capacity and AI could replace some of the human tasks that are more administrative, we need to understand what is the role for human transition in the labor market, what is redefining what the role of the human is relative to AI, and what the contributions might be of each, which ensures that robustness and security and safety around the application of AI as part of our day-to-day work. And then, of course, the most was around accountability, which is things like who owns the data, what are we going to do with the data, who is responsible and who is governing and accountable for the recommendations that AI suggests. And this is where we need international cooperation with every one of you on the call and anyone else watching on YouTube after, is around having this international cooperation to ensure trustworthy AI. So I don't know if any of you have watched the Class of '09. I know no particular shared interest in Netflix, but Class of '09 is worth watching if you're into understanding, where AI could impact on health and impact on society. But it really follows a series of FBI agents who've come out of a particular class, graduated 2009, and follows them over time as AI and technology and develop changes the way they practice. And some of the principles I think is important there, which is why I highlighted it, around ethical and responsible use. As our webinar focuses on health and ethical responsible use, it is time then to turn our minds to think about, what is it when it comes to health that makes the health application particularly important? So as I illustrated with Imogen before in her health journey, there are so many points where AI could implement and completely revolutionize the healthcare journey. Where it is important is that the data that we're dealing with, very much like we're dealing with data in the justice system, in the health system, the data we have is very sensitive, very private. And also the outcomes and decisions that we make could have huge human implications in terms of health. So when it comes to ethical and responsible use, we need to think of these points that I have. One, we need to think about the quality of the data. With AI, it only learns from the data that's in, and we've seen this with ChatGPT. So there have been some studies that have shown that earlier versions of ChatGPT were able to perform better on simple mathematical problems than later versions of ChatGPT. And it's because it's the idea of garbage in, garbage out. Just like a child, if we're teaching them things that are bad habits or incorrect data, they are only going to feed back bad habits or incorrect data. And so the quality of the data that we use to train these outcomes in health is paramount, because if the data contains biases, if the data contains missingness, it will reflect that in the accuracy of outcomes. And we see that as well with generative AI. They're able to generate conclusions and make up data to fill in missing data gaps. And that's where we said it can hallucinate or generate recommendations. So we have to think about the accuracy of the outcomes from a health point of view and whether this makes common sense. And how do we ensure data quality in terms of what is going into these AI algorithms? When it comes to large data sets, to train these models, we do need a large amount of data. But with large amount of data, where do we get this data from? So from everyone here who's listening in a virtual room, I'm sure we've all been in contact with the health system in some way. So our data, when we visit a health system, could potentially contribute. But the question here is, do you want your data to contribute to an AI model? Do you know where your data is being used? What are the applications? Are you happy for your data to be shared? Are you happy only for some of your data to be shared? Perhaps there is only a part of your data that you're happy to be shared, but there are other parts of your data that you would rather keep to yourself in terms of privacy. So that comes down to the question, how do we ensure data control? There is a need for large data sets to move the healthcare and AI field forward, but there is also privacy, security reasons, and consent. And there's also, in terms of privacy, there is also the flip side that there is AI itself may also predict private information. So if there is enough data and the AI is looking at these patterns, the AI potentially may look at your information and suggest things that you may not even know. For example, it may detect you using your mouse on the computer. It may detect a tremor or changes in the patterns that you're using your mouse. It may simply be from a wrist injury, for example, or AI might misinterpret it or correctly interpret it and say it could be early onset Parkinson's disease. So that's where we really need to be accurate and understand, do we want AI to be making those judgments and recommendations based on the information? And do we want AI to be able to predict, diagnostic states? And whilst we all agree, if we do have a health condition, it may be better to intervene early to save lives and reduce impact on our quality of life. At what point do we want to know that we may become unwell? And that is an ethical dilemma. Even now with genomics, with people who have a genetically inherited disease, for example, as you said, with cancers, there are family members that may inherit a particular gene, but before they're told that information, they often undergo a lot of genetic counseling with the family members, because it's very difficult to navigate. If you carried a gene and you have daughters or granddaughters, for example, the BRCA gene or a breast cancer gene, do you want to know? If you were the person, if you were a parent of a daughter, would you want your daughter to know? Or does your daughter want to know? And at what age do you share that information? And then there's also a lot of navigation around ethical use of that data and the counseling points, because you want to make sure there is no blaming. You don't want family relationships to be strained because of sharing of this information. And some people would prefer in their coping strategy not to know. For example, if people were able to predict exactly what age you were going to develop XYZ disease, do you want to know now? If you know you were going to develop dementia when you're 80 and you're only 30 now, do you want to know now and intervene? Only if you can do things to intervene, but if you can't, do you still want to know? So this is around some of the ethical questions we have to ask ourselves. And so there was a 2018 survey around data sharing that was done with American adults, and they found that it depends a little bit also on who we're sharing it with. So overwhelmingly, 72% were more than happy to share their health data with their health professional. And that's what we do a lot in the healthcare consultation. But when asked, are they happy to share it with health tech data, with tech companies, and only 11% were willing to share their health data with technology companies. So again, who is taking that information and who is developing the AI is also important for trust and acceptance. As you said, besides quality, privacy, we also talked a little bit about governance. So who is responsible for that data? How do we ensure data security and also data sovereignty? So with data, there's also cultural considerations. So some cultural groups, they may be indigenous populations that have sovereignty rights or ownership around their data. How do they feel around sharing their data, and what does that mean for their identity and their families as well? There's also accountability. So as we said, sharing data is one thing. If we provide information to you, as I said in the dementia case, if we told you at 30 you were going to develop dementia by 80, who is then accountable for sharing that information? Would you want to hear it from your app? Do you want to hear it from your phone? Do you want to hear it from your health provider? But is your health provider trained to interpret the AI algorithm and the information? And then, as we said, at the end of the day, who is then accountable for following up your care? If it's happening in 50 years' time, your health provider or family doctor is not likely to still be in practice. So who is ultimately accountable for making sure you get that treatment that you need or following you up to prevent that dementia onset? So I don't think these systems and infrastructure have been worked out to see how we support that use of AI and predictive technology. As you said, it all comes down to trust and acceptance by the patient, making sure there are no biases, which I'll illustrate with an example later on, but also what is practical, usable in practice, what is pragmatic. And there is, as I said, the ethics of, do you just tell people, do you just monitor, or is it ethical only to tell people if you can do something about it? Is information the power, and is information the knowledge? Or is it doing something with the information that is most powerful? So those are some considerations we need to think about, as I said, also the commercial interests around health interests and medtech interest. There's no, I tried to find a diagram for this webinar that really illustrated all the things I talked about. Couldn't really find one, but this one's pretty good. It was really around clinical AI application and medical imaging. But I found a lot of these things that we talked about is encompassed in this diagram. So we talked about in the journey, the data governance. So things like considering patient consent, the data quality, the infrastructure. And then once you have the data, you then develop the algorithm. But then with the algorithm, how do you make sure that there isn't cyber attacks that affect the accuracy of the algorithm? How do you ensure your algorithm is fair and not biased? And I already touched on how do you make sure it's explainable and transparent? And at the end of the day, do we have trust and acceptance? And that's the AI here figure on the left. These are all the different stakeholders, your patient and the public is a very important part of it. But there's also the health providers, the health system, and there's also the scientists, the researchers, there's also the medical vendors, the health tech companies, but also regulators and lawyers and the legal and ethical aspects, as well as people developing technology, such as engineers, software developers, and also the ethicists around the ethics. So there's so many stakeholders, and do we reach a consensus? So I think with AI and health, that's where we are on the journey. We're at the stakeholder consensus stage. We're trying to work out how to actually implement this. But ultimately, it's a balance between human and AI. And there's also legal and ethical issues to consider, which is, as we said, this webinar series is trying to get everyone to think around some of those ethical and responsible use of AI. So to last end of it, I'll go through some case examples. I'll just check the chat. So there's nothing in the chat. Again, if you have any comments, any questions, feel free just to pop that in the chat. So when things go wrong, so these are some things around some examples of where we have to consider the accuracy and the biases of AI. So Purdue case. So the Purdue model is something that I think was started perhaps with good intentions. Purdue Pharma is a pharmaceutical company, and it contracted and had a relationship with a digital records contractor called Practice Fusion, which runs one of the largest electronic health records platforms in America. And what they found over a couple of years is that the relationship, there was a collusion that the pharmaceutical company had a kickback scheme where the digital electronic health records platform would receive money from the pharmaceutical company for putting up some pop-up alerts. Now, pop-up alerts based on AI algorithms are generally very, very beneficial, and it's one of the things it could help promote safe and effective prescribing. In this case, the pop-up alerts were pushing doctors to prescribe painkillers, which at the end ended up very addictive. So some of you may have heard of the drug OxyContin or opioids and the opioid pandemic. That is all around these pop-up alerts pushing doctors to prescribe these painkillers. So they built these clinical decision alerts that rely on these algorithms, but they found the agreement was actually unlawful. And he said these alerts really increase the prescription of these extended release painkillers, which would increase the addictive potential. And what they heard with the court was that the marketing staff from the pharmaceutical company helped design the alert, but they actually ignored clinical-based, evidence-based guidelines. So it was actually contradicting what evidence-based guidelines were promoting around chronic pain, which would be not to be prescribing and over-prescribing opioids. And so what it did was also was suggesting opioids as a safe option that was on par with other options such as exercise therapy and non-opioid analgesic options, so safer non-opioid options for pain and non-pharmacological options for recovery. So it wasn't really depicting accurate truths. So that's why it was an unlawful. But through this, it demonstrated the power of where these algorithms aren't checked and it doesn't have the human input. So one of the things we have to consider is who is inputting in these AI algorithms. There needs to be regulation around stakeholders. So it's where this could have been picked up at any point if there had been greater oversight. So it's around regulation of these AI algorithms, understanding beyond the black box, what is driving these algorithms, how are these decisions being made, and how can we monitor these clinical alerts so that we can see there is no harm done from these particular alerts. At the same time, around harm, there's AI biases. So there's quite a lot of literature and research that has already been done to show that AI algorithms can potentially be biased because it depends a lot on the data it's trained from. Because if there are biases in the data, as we said, if the data is not high quality, then AI will learn from the biases. And it makes it very difficult because of the black box nature of AI. It's very difficult for human health professionals to easily or feasibly supervise what goes into these AI algorithms. So one classic example was around the claims around, it was meant to identify and flag patients who needed more support, so needed high risk care. So patients who were flagged as high risk got more intensive support and care, which is a great system. Then a problem is, how do you flag who is high risk? So this healthcare prediction algorithm to identify patients in need of high risk care, they found in the end it was far less likely to recommend Black patients. And so the algorithm used healthcare spending. So when they looked at what went into the algorithm, they found it was cost, it was healthcare spend that was driving the risk score. And so the model learnt that the greater the money or the greater the cost that you were willing to spend on your health, that must reflect a greater need, which makes sense because you're thinking, if you have a greater health need, if you're sicker, you end up paying for more healthcare. So the AI algorithm made an association between healthcare spend as a proxy for need. But the problem here is what they found is, because of income disparity, that sicker Black patients were actually a similar cost to healthier white patients. And so they received lower risk scores. So there was something along here around the healthcare costs, and that because of income disparity, they were less likely to spend even though they were sicker. And so cost was not an accurate proxy for determining need. And so some of the recommendations we really need to think about is, how do you ensure high quality data that is representative of your population? And how do you ensure there is oversight? And this is done by engaging with both the patient and the provider and educating the provider to actually look at what the risk score is composed of. And this is from the paper. It's quite interesting to look at how the algorithm scores were made. But what you can see here is in purple here for the Black patients, and then in the yellow orange color was the white patients. And then they were referred for screening if they were at a score here with the dotted line, just around midpoint, just above 50, they were referred for screening. And obviously if they're high risk score, they were defaulted into the program straight away. So that's when they're closer to 100, they go automatically in the program. But what you can see is for the same risk score here, it was a much lower threshold that even when they are referred into the health system for white people, you can see that had less chronic conditions. So on the left axis here, the number of active chronic conditions for the same score. So we take the score, I think it was just around 56, 57. You can see for referral into a program, by the time they got referral, Black patients were sicker. They had more conditions to be able to get into the program compared to white patients. And that if this was adjusted, so on the right, they had the original score and they simulated it. If they had simulated it after adjusting for these biases, you can see it's completely different, that the fraction of Black people that should be represented into the program based on adjustment for the healthcare spend, adjusting for the chronic conditions, you can see there should have been a lot more referral into the program. You can see how much higher the orange line is with the simulated program, which is corrected and adjusted for bias compared to the original program. So you can see there is some things to think about in terms of making sure there are no biases in the data, because it tends to underrepresent populations with greater health need. And then there's the information sharing piece. As we know, there's a large proportion of information actually rests in the hands of large tech companies. So Google, Microsoft, IBM, Apple, there's a lot of existing technology, and there's a lot of data sharing that could occur. And there is one case of DeepMind that people may know about. It was originally owned by Alphabet Inc., and they partnered actually with Royal Free London. The intent was good. They wanted to assist the management of acute kidney injury. But what happened is that when they looked into the case, that a lot of patients weren't aware and they were not afforded any control or agency over the use of the health information. And the privacy impacts were not discussed. And what happened is in the time, it was owned originally by Alphabet Inc. Google then took control of DeepMind, and Google was a US-based company, but the hospital and the data is a UK company. So data control effectively also transferred from the UK to US. So then there is information sharing implications to think about and cross-border implications. So do patients feel comfortable about data sharing shared overseas? And then the questions to ask for those who work in AI: where are your servers located? What kind of data is located on the servers? Have we stripped any identifying information? Are we dealing only with anonymous or de-identified information? Do we have consent? Who owns the data? If it's transferred across different servers, who ultimately owns and controls the data? And then there's around the time factor. So this happened over time. And so initially it might have started as a small initiative, but as of all things, as the technology grows, and that might be handed over to different people or different directors or CEOs, it then may change. And so are there safeguards in 5 years and 10 years around that data? How long is that data going to be existing, and who may use that data over time? So in this case of DeepMind, they started with Royal Free London. It was around improving care locally, but then it became bigger and then it became transferred to the US, and then it was used by Google. Is that something that was allowed and consented to, and who may use that data over time? So these changing healthcare needs is another factor to think about. And then as we end, as we said, we'll welcome some questions. I'm just going to end on a thought here. It's called a nirvana fallacy. So it touched on a lot of considerations because this webinar is around ethical and responsible use of data, particularly in health, and things to think about. But as we know, AI actually has a potential to save lives and revolutionize and improve healthcare. And the problem with the nirvana fallacy is the idea that you are aiming for perfectionism. And this is when we compare the new option, for example, AI, to perfection, the ideal, as opposed to status quo, which is now without AI. So in here, we have to think there are risks with AI, but there are risks in any health system. And even if we don't do anything, if we say we are banning AI from all aspects of our lives or all aspects of healthcare, it's not changing things. There will continue to be medical errors, dosing errors, inefficiencies in healthcare system. And there are risks and challenges. It's just those risks and challenges just may look different when we encompass AI. So doing nothing just because AI is imperfect could also be unethical and irresponsible. So here I'll leave you with that thought, and I'd welcome any comments for those of you on the chat to understand a little bit more about your thoughts on AI and your use in practice in your local countries. And as you said, welcome to ask me a question at this point, or else I'll also leave my contact details at the last end of my slide. All right. We said, well, if there's no active questions, like I said, I do welcome any comments and any feedback. So you can contact me. I left my email for those of you who use Twitter or X or LinkedIn. You can always contact me and reach out. So as you said, this recording will be on part of the YouTube series for responsible and ethical AI. And I'd like to thank the World Universities Network as well for inviting me to be part of this program of work on ethical and responsible use of AI, and obviously to Matadol University for facilitating and organizing this. So thank you everybody for coming. I'll stop sharing here for now. Thank you and welcome, we said, and hopefully we'll hear from some of you soon.